That's all.
Well, I'm not very no. I was actually going to try that, but yeah, I'm just going to abandon all attempts to even try that. So, look, Joe, can I just dive straight in and ask you a question? I love the work you do with spontaneous remissions. You know, your research into. Can I just ask, what is it that really got you interest in researching this?
Yeah, I think I had my own personal experience, my own wake up call, and had an opportunity in my own personal journey to heal myself. And I was a 24-year-old kid, and back in the 80s, you really didn't say no to doctors when you had a traumatic injury. And I was weighing what I knew against what I didn't know, and I thought, is there a possibility that my mind could actually heal my body? It seemed like it was possible. I read enough books about it, but it was philosophical. It was theoretical. It was intellectual information that was really, for me, void of experience. So when you have to step out of the bleachers and onto the playing field, you have to step into the unknown. And so I went through my own personal healing process, and it worked. And then I started thinking, my goodness, if it worked for me, has it ever worked for anybody else? And so I started, interviewing people that were treating conventionally and unconventionally for certain chronic health conditions that ranged from everything from Parkinson's to rheumatoid arthritis to cancers and genetic diseases. And I wanted to see if there was some cause that was producing that effect. And so after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people, I found some of the commonalities and they were really primarily had everything to do with how the mind affects the body. I was, a Puritan at the time. I was, ate really well. I exercised. I did yoga. I had my own martial arts studio. I did triathlons. But none of those things were consistent that I thought I would find in the healing process. And what I found was that it was primarily certain things that had to do with how we can begin to influence our gene expression, influence the way our brain is wired, and really get a greater understanding of this concept of psychoneuroimmunology, how the mind affects the body. We know then that, if you're angry and frustrated, if you're in pain, that the arousal of the stress hormones long-term downregulates genes and creates disease. And so a great example of the mind-body connection was if you can get stressed out by thinking about your problems, that's a great example of the mind-body connection, because really your thoughts are going to make you sick. So I started thinking, God, if your thoughts can make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts can make you well? And so the people that I interviewed were so inspiring to me because they were common people. And they came from all walks of life. They were all races, all cultures, all professions, ate all kinds of food, some drank, there was just no commonality in that way. But so I found the four principles. And then the next question I asked was, all right, so this is what I've filtered it down to. Science is about redundancy. It's about patterns, about repetition. Could we teach people how to do it? And so for the first year, we didn't see a whole lot of changes, except people had a better sense of well-being. And then it started to happen. And when we started to see those dramatic changes, I have to tell you, many years later, I think I'm more surprised than anybody to see some of the things that we're discovering.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. It's quite similar. Like I've been studying kind of visualization for years and years and years, not doing any research on it. I'd love to ask you about your research in a few minutes, but one of the examples that that really switched me on to this, that really got me researching myself, just literature research, was a lady who had a chronic kidney disease and a very, very low kidney function. And she started to use visualization, but she didn't know what to visualize, and she didn't know what even a kidney cell looked like, but she imagined she was inside her body, and she imagined that she created a mental representation of a diseased kidney cell. And for her, it looked like a kind of blobby thing that was dried and shriveled and grey. And she said she gave it a little spoonful of green juice, like medicine. And she said it went like that, and its cheeks flushed. And then she took a a sponge, and she dipped it in healing, what she called healing fluid, and just began to gently sponge down this, the kidney cell. And as she sponged it, the shriveled, the grayness began to wash away to reveal a nice healthy pink. And as she kept sponging it, it kind of popped out into a nice bulbous pink color. Then she would give it a hug and kiss it and tell it how much she loves it. And she would say something like, "Thank you so much for the amazing job that you're doing right now and have always done in keeping us healthy. I love you so much." And then she would do the same with the next cell. And she did that every single day. And a year later, she was discharged from the hospital when her kidney function was in the normal range. And when she told me her story, she actually broke down. She was so overwhelmed, And when I first heard about that, I didn't really understand how the mind-body connection worked. And that's what I love about your research, because you're turning woo-woo into kind of true-woo. You're actually doing the research that's shown people how these things actually work. So would you be able to share how you think, the mind-body connection works in that context of the spontaneous remissions?
Sure. So I'll answer it, David, in two ways, because the example that you gave is such a great example. I tend to venture away from the word visualization because most men, and I hate to categorize, will say, I don't really visualize. But if you say, can you concept yourself hitting a tennis ball or a golf ball? They'll say, oh, yes, I can do that. So I like the idea of this concept called mental rehearsal. And what it turns out is that when we're truly present and we are in the moment and we're in the visualizing process, the brain does not know the difference between the real life experience and what the person is imagining. Now, experience enriches brain circuitry. And the problem is that when we're facing a health condition or a crisis, we always tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen, because the arousal of the stress hormones prepares us for the worst, right? So teaching yourself to stay present and not go to the worst case scenario is being present. And someone who can carry a thought for that long and go through the process of interacting with the kidney, the brain doesn't know the difference between whether it's real or not if you don't break from it and start thinking about, am I going to be on dialysis the rest of my life? If it's one long moment, experience enriches circuitry in the brain. So the brain looks like, over time, that the experience has already happened. You start to install the neurological hardware ahead of the event. Now, if you keep doing it, the hardware becomes a software program, and it becomes easier to do it the next time because now you're creating circuitry. And what is mind? Mind is the brain in action. So you're installing a new mind. Now, it turns out that thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of your body. So the moment this woman begins to hug the kidney and kiss the kidney and feel the emotions of love, the body is so objective as the unconscious mind that it does not know the difference between the real life experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that the person is fabricating by thought alone. In fact, the body's believing it's living in an environment where love is the outcome. So turns out, according to epigenetics, and you know this, it's the environment that signals the gene. Well, the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion. So this person is signaling the gene expression ahead of the environment. She's not waiting for her healing to occur to feel the love and joy and gratitude. Yeah. Her body's believing the healing is happening when? In the present moment. And the body doesn't know the difference. So if you combine a clear intention, and we've done enough research on this, that's a coherent brain. There's an orderliness to the brain. With an elevated emotion, a coherent heart, you literally begin to move the brain and body out of the past into a new future. And so do that enough times, the way you think and the way you feel begins to create a state of being. So if you begin to push the genetic buttons or upregulate genes for health, and you downregulate the gene for disease, well, what do genes do? They make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. And the expression of proteins is the expression of life. And the innate intelligence of the body says, hey, we're in an environment where we can heal, and the body has a natural propensity to want to move back into homeostasis, move back into balance. So then the person is literally changing their state of being. How you think and how you feel is your state of being. So the person goes from literally being somebody that was riddled with a disease to changing the way they think and feel, and her brain and body looks like the healing has already occurred, and she's not waiting for the healing to occur to feel the emotion. She's feeling the emotion and she's living the experience ahead of it. And if we do it properly, our biology literally begins to change. And just like in trauma, the stronger the emotion that we feel from some problem, some condition, some event in our life, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more we pay attention to the cause, and the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. Well, what about the inward process? The stronger the emotion the person feels from an inward experience, the more she remembers the picture in their mind, and you begin to brand that circuitry in your brain, and in a sense, you're remembering your future in the same way that you remember your past. Now, thinking neurologically within those circuits and feeling in the emotions of the future before it happens is the task. Because many people come back to their senses and they say, I'm not healed, it didn't work. Well, you're not that good. It takes time and it takes repetition until you condition the body to the mind of that emotion. And all you need is a thought and a feeling, an image and an emotion, a stimulus and a response, and you start the conditioning process. And if you do it enough times, you'll never be wondering why you haven't healed, because you'll feel like you already are healed. The moment you start feeling the other emotions, you're back to the old self, looking for when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen. If you feel the emotion, you feel like it already happens, you wouldn't be separate from the experience, so there's nowhere to look for it. So then the task is to maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day with your eyes open. And that's when we get really good at becoming somebody else.
Brilliant. What an amazing explanation. This is what I love about, this is a sort of thing that people a few years ago used to call woo-woo. And I've said, in the book, I've been saying that people refer to things as woo-woo, not because they're experts in that field and they actually know if something's true or not, but because they're not experts and they really don't understand it and it just doesn't sound plausible to them. And that's why I love that there's so much science now that, and you're doing a lot of it, which is absolutely wonderful, but there's so much science that's actually demonstrating that this kind of stuff really, really is cool. One of the things, you talked about repetition there. One of the ways I often talk about that is, like, if you go to the gym and if I work out my bicep, let's say, then two things happen. The muscle becomes firmer and it becomes larger. But if you work out a region of the brain, then the exact same thing happens, although all the neuroscientists don't call it muscle growth, they call it neuroplasticity. But the idea is similar, that if I say work out that part of the brain, let's say by focusing on my breath and just becoming mindful of the fact that I'm breathing, then that part of the brain begins to grow and become more powerful. And what I think is amazing, if you put a little bit of feeling into that, and let's move your attention from mindfulness to what I call kindfulness. Allow your attention to focus on either a memory of when someone was really kind to you, or you were kind to someone else, and how that felt. Or even when you witnessed an act of kindness, and allow yourself to feel that. Then that also exercises this, but a wee bit deeper in, and also the compassion regions. And it's like the brain is being activated in different parts according to where you put your mind. I find that kind of stuff fascinating. Thought and feeling combined is literally changing the structure of the brain.
Well, it's a great conversation, because this also explains why people don't heal. Because if you keep firing and wiring the same thoughts in your mind that are related to complaining and blaming and making excuses and feeling sorry for yourself and judging other people, nerve cells that fire together, wire together, you'll develop a very, very complex neurological network that you installed, and keep doing it. It becomes so automatic, it becomes unconscious. Those thoughts, for the most part, are slipping by people's awareness unnoticed, unchecked. And every thought has a chemical associated with it. So The moment the person begins to review the problems in their life, and those problems are connected to certain people and certain objects and certain conditions at certain times and places, the moment they start thinking of their problems, they're thinking in the past, because the brain literally is a record of the past, and every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment they recall the problem, they feel the emotion of sadness or guilt or shame or unworthiness. Now the body's in the past. So then if you begin to weigh the number of times people unconsciously do that in their waking day, they may have the best visualization, meditation, rehearsal in the morning and start out with really good intentions. But that's 45 minutes or a half an hour weighed against the other 16 or 15 hours of their day where they're back to their old self. And so the thinking positively have no effect on the body, because it's a small portion of what the person is doing on a regular basis. So the process of change, there's an equal component of unlearning. There's an equal component of becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, becoming aware of your automatic habits and behaviors, even how you speak, and sensing and noticing the emotions that you feel that have become so familiar to you on a regular basis that it feels like you. And the moment you stop doing that, you got to get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. It's not going to feel like you anymore. And many people will go back to suffering and complaining, because at least they know how they feel. They were back in the known. So this is such an important concept, because this explains why people, when they do the work and they don't notice the results, they get up from their meditations believing in their future less, instead of doing their meditations and getting up and believing in their future more, right? And so the reality is, yes, it takes equal amount of firing and wiring and equal amount of emotional conditioning to condition the body to the future. But you have to retire the personality of the past, and you got to stay so conscious of your unconscious self that you don't go unconscious in your waking day. And that's being in that river of change. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of awareness to do it.
Yeah, I love that line. What was it you said? You have to go retire that. What was it you said? The version of the past, that old self.
Yeah, yes, retire the old personality self.
Yeah, I love that. I've never heard that before. That's absolutely brilliant. You know, I was looking on your website, and you do these astonishing long meditations, and you can see the moment you enter. People are hooked to heart monitors all day, and then as soon as they start meditating, their heart rhythms completely change. You know, can you explain what's going on? You know, what's going on here?
I am so optimistic, David, about human potential, more so now than I've ever been. And to follow your point that you mentioned earlier, the conversation that we are having with reputable scientists and physicians and researchers all over the world right now is not the same conversation that I had 15 years ago with physicians and researchers and doctors. There is a compelling amount of evidence now that is pointing the finger that it all lives within you. And so when we started seeing people in our events stepping out of wheelchairs, or blind people seeing and deaf people hearing, and not once, not twice, over and over again, people with stage 4 cancers and Parkinson's and all kinds of health conditions go into remission right in real time. Like, there it is, there's a tumor, and then 7 days later, it's not there. I mean, I don't think you can go back to business as usual, right? You just can't. So we decided to measure everything. We've done over 12,000 brain scans, maybe more by now. We've done thousands and thousands, 10,000 HRV measurements. We've measured gene expression. We've measured immune regulation. We've measured telomeres. We've measured thousands and thousands of metabolic markers on a cellular level to determine whether a cell is in growth and repair or it's in breakdown. And one of the things that we realized is that people have to be able to execute and understand what they're doing and why they're doing. In other words, we do brain scans on people before our event, and then they go through 7 days of training and we check their brain at the end of the event, I want to see that those changes aren't just in their mind. I want to see them in their brain. And I want to see people be able to, when they combine that clear intention, a coherent brain with an elevated emotion, that I want to be able to say to them, David, you're doing it. You actually sustained and changed your physiology. You changed your autonomic nervous system, and you don't have to be a yogi or a mystic to do this. You just got to learn a formula. And I want you to be able to sustain it with your eyes closed for 45 minutes. And I want you to be able to do it so well that you can do it with your eyes open when you're in your life, because that's when it matters the most. Not when you're sitting in a meditation. That's so you're not distracted. That's to get your brain and body right. But the real game is when you have to do it when you don't want to do it. And it's not that you react. I mean, we all react. The question is, how long are you going to react? So then teaching people how to self-regulate and to be in circumstances and conditions in their life where they're not going to knee-jerk and return back to the same emotions that are primitive, that drive very limited behaviors. And then, of course, there's a gap between the way things appear when we're altered emotionally and the way things really are. And we have to learn how to contain the animal self and not demonstrate a limited expression. So then our job then is to be able to teach people how to be able to turn fear into kindness or compassion, to turn anger into love, to turn pain into joy. And that's when it matters the most. So we know that formula of brain and heart coherence. And one of the things we did at our last event in July in Denver is we developed an algorithm to be able to measure how the brain and the heart work together on a beautiful, beautiful scan. Our neuroscientists created this algorithm. And we grabbed people like students that have been in the work. One was chasing his kid around on the break and she was challenging him. And the other one was a staff member that was running around with me and doing a bunch of things before the day started. And we just sat them down and you saw everything was out of balance. And then all of a sudden you see this person in about 5-10 minutes start to get that heart back into balance. And we now know that when the heart moves back into order, it's informing the brain that it's safe to create. It's telling the brain to get out of survival and start thinking about a possibility of how to create a change, right? So we started measuring a very low frequency in the heart that's the energy indigenous of the heart. And when that heart starts to beat in rhythm, like grabbing a big sheet, giving it a big whip like that, you see this wave of energy move right into the brain, and the brain waves change into a creative state called coherent alpha. Now, if you do that enough times, and we started seeing this, these slower brain waves become a carrier wave for faster waves. And you see all of a sudden the brain go into these very, very fast coherent signals of gamma. Now, why is that important? Because gamma is super consciousness. Gamma is a greater level of awareness. So now you have a body that's completely relaxed and poised, out of survival, and the brain super alert and aware. And that's when you're in the sweet spot of the present moment. And that's what I call the natural state of being. So what happens when that occurs is it seems like we begin to get information, not from our senses because our eyes are closed, we're in a meditation, where music's in the background. You're not getting information like you normally do from signals in the environment. You're getting information from the field, from that quantum field. And the more coherent your brain and heart are, the more there's a resonance or a cadence or a harmony between frequencies. The more you have a coherent frequency, the more you get coherent information. And that arousal that's created when this occurs and the brain goes into gamma isn't the typical arousal of pain. It isn't the typical arousal of anger or aggression. It isn't the typical arousal of fear or anxiety. The arousal tends to be ecstasy. The arousal tends to be bliss. We begin to dip into the divine. We begin to connect to energy or to that field. And that person has a very transcendental moment. The information that they're receiving is very relevant to their own personal journey. And it only takes one of those where you feel a level of love, a level of bliss, a level of joy, I don't know, whatever you want to call whatever that is, that causes the person to realize that it's not coming from anyone or anything out there. It's always been within me. Now the love affair begins, and it gets very difficult to miss a date. So my interest is to demystify that process. And now we're developing the technology to be able to say, we now know that you can do it. And the two people that we just, as an example, that did it in that one day, they were in these beautiful patterns, and they said, oh God, I was just getting going. I didn't want it to end. Now that's a good sign, because if you don't want an experience to end because of how it feels, I say you're moving closer and closer to source, more and more to the present moment. And so we have such great data to say that anybody can do it.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I when I was working on this book, I put some of this into practice. I hooked myself up to the HeartMath monitor, and I noticed that before I did that, when I was typing, that sometimes you're on a train of thought and you suddenly thought, I've got an idea, and you start typing. What I would do is I would start typing faster and faster, and rather than forget my train of thought, and before I know it, my shoulders are tensing and I'm like that. And I noticed when I connected myself to the heart monitor that I lost all the coherence in my heart. And so what I found, and I trained myself while I was writing this book, that to simultaneously be aware of my heart, aware of my breath in my heart as I was typing, and then I began to slow down, and I started writing some of the best quality that I've been doing. And like you said, it was like I reached you reach a higher level. And all I really had to do was bring myself back to the fact that I'm breathing, and notice that I'm breathing, and just allow my attention to drift onto the area of my heart. And it really enhanced, personally, I found it enhanced my actual work. And I'd never tried it before until really just, sometimes, I'm quite guilty of this. I often tell people, this is all the things you can do, but sometimes I forget my own stuff. And so that was a reminder to myself that I want to write the best quality. I've really got to remember to bring my attention back to this. And it was such a great lesson.
Yeah. And gosh, you practice it enough times, it becomes a skill. And that's when it matters the most. When everybody else is freaked out and out of balance, you're the one that has practiced enough times that you see another possibility that nobody else sees, and you're not in that state where your response to everything in your world is weakening you. You're in a place where you're actually gaining energy, and that's when it gets fun, right? Because I say the heart is the creative center.
Yeah.
Sense.
Yeah. That's actually what I think that's called the natural healer effect. One of the things, in my work over the last year writing this book, I've written a lot about alternative therapies, like biofield therapies, Reiki, therapeutic touch, these kind of things. But I've discussed some of it in the context of that natural healer effect, meaning that as we begin to bring ourselves to the present, just by your presence, you begin to heal people, because your heart, the coherence in your heart, begins to impact the other person's heart and their brain. And so no matter what type of healing technique you do, just bringing yourself back to the present and to love and empathy and compassion before you do anything actually begins to heal other people. It's amazing.
It's the truth. It's the truth. It's not woo-woo. It's the truth. So we took 1,000 people, and we had them in an event, and we had 50 people in the front of the room wearing heart rate monitors. And we had the entire room move into an elevated state and connect to the field, open their hearts, and then simply send the thought on that carrier wave, on that frequency of love or kindness or compassion, that the people wearing the heart rate monitors, that their bodies be healed, that their lives be enriched, that their dreams come true, and that the mystical find them. And at the exact same time, the exact same day, the exact same meditation, you saw the majority of those people sitting there. Their autonomic nervous system wasn't trained to a greater level of order, and their heart went into coherence. They started feeling the feelings of love, and it's love what connects us. So when we start teaching people how to heal remotely or heal another person, you need a coherent signal. If you don't have a coherent signal, you don't have a signal. You don't have anything. You're not connected. So we started measuring the amount of coherence in the brain and in the heart with the healers and the healee. And there is a very direct correlation energetically all of a sudden when they lock in. So then we saw that the people who responded and had a dramatic change in their health were in the same frequency and the same rhythm as the majority of the healers. And the more the healers were in coherence as a collective, the more they were generating a stronger signal, the more the effects they produced in matter, because it's not matter that's creating that field, it's the field that's creating matter. Change the energy in the field, you change the hologram in three-dimensional reality. So then we started bringing in random event generators in our last event to see the probability of how much we're influencing outcomes. And a random event generator is just a sophisticated coin toss. But we're measuring a coin toss in the hundreds of thousands to millions per second, right? So it's just not a one coin toss. It's a lot of probabilities, right? And in all three of the coherence healings that we did in 3 days in a row, we moved way outside of that 50-50 chance of it just being chance. You saw there was a dramatic effect produced in the field. Now, why is that significant? It's significant because it's the truth. It's significant because you won't find it in a pharmaceutical commercial, or you won't find it in certain places because it's not information that has to get out there. And so an example, your book offers so many great ways for people to really begin to become informed about possibility. And why is that essential? Because once you're aware of a possibility, you're conscious of something else that can, as a new way of doing things. And if people are able to execute and do them properly, that's a footprint that they left in consciousness for somebody else to step into. And now the outcome is you become less reliant on something outside of you to get some type of change. You start relying on something more inside of you.
Brilliant. I'm glad you're talking about this because, I've written, I think, 3 chapters of the book all about consciousness and this sense of interconnectedness. And one of the things that I talked about is a number of studies show that if you take 2 people and place one of them inside an MRI scanner or having their brain scanned, then their brain reacts to some of the experiences of the other of their partner. And here's the thing, the effect is much, much stronger if there's a connection between them, if they share an emotional connection, whether it's love or empathy or compassion, but there's a sense of felt connection. And when I started to review all the data that you've shown, I cover random event generators as well. And even I think some of the research on that showed, like you've just found yourself, that the impact on random event generators is much more profound when you actually have this sense of feeling and connection, when there's love and empathy and compassion. And the combined data, if you take all of the data together, and this is what I mean, people still, refer to all this as woo-woo, but yet the statistical data is off the charts. In fact, the statistical threshold that the Higgs boson, that the God particle that was discovered at the particle accelerator CERN in 2012, the statistical threshold that met was called 5 sigma. And that means it's, gold standard in science, it's widely accepted. But, the combined data for psi, consciousness, interconnectedness, is actually 6 sigma. And it's an order of magnitude greater than that, but yet people still refer to it as kind of woo-woo. So I love that you're doing that work now in a larger scale, and lots of other scientists are doing this work. And finally, people are learning that we really are all interconnected and we really do impact each other. And the more we find that space within ourselves of love and compassion and empathy and care, then the better healers we actually become as well.
Yes, we're working. It's absolutely the truth, David. We're working right now to decide and figure out. We're pretty sure this is the truth. It's not the number of people and the amount of energy that a greater population of people produces. Because you can go to a football game, a soccer game, there'd be 30,000 hooligans or 50,000 people, and they're cheering, but it's not coherent energy, it's entropic energy. That energy has some effect, but you can take a smaller group of people, and if they're coherent in their brain and heart, and they all have a unanimous or collective order, the signal's so much stronger, and it produces more immediate effects. So it's about having a Wi-Fi signal. You got brain coherence and heart coherence. Now you're connected, and that's when I think doors of possibility open up. And so for me, we have such great evidence in our scientific studies right now with meditation, and we have such great evidence with testimonies of people that have actually made those kind of changes and transitions. And evidence really is the loudest voice right now, because once you see the evidence, it's the truth. You see somebody on the stage in your event stand up and talk about how she healed herself of a kidney condition, and if you look in the audience, every single person is motionless. They're looking at her. They're looking at truth. They're looking at an example of truth. They're looking at possibility becoming a reality. And invariably, there's always somebody in the audience with a similar health condition that says, my God, she doesn't look any different than me. If she can do it, I can do it. And there's the 4-minute mile right there. That's when you start breaking a veneer of consciousness. And now it's out. There's a footprint in the quantum field that possibility has actually turned into a reality. And now you're looking at the person in 3-dimensional reality saying, there's the disease and now it's gone. And if it worked for me, people are going to say, wait a second, say that again? Say that again. What did you do? They're going to want to know what you did to get there. And I think closing the gap between the thought of being healed and the experience of being healed, between cause and effect, between one point of consciousness separated from another point of consciousness, closing that interval is mastering creating from the field instead of from matter. And so many people, they can do all the right diets, they can eat all the right food, they can exercise, all that stuff. If they're still living in fear, if they're still overanalyzing themselves, if they're judging themselves and others, and they're perfectionistic and controlling, none of that will make a difference until that person, reconciles some of those states with themselves. So I think it's a huge conversation that has to be made. And it has to be practical. And I think when people start seeing it as practical, and the evidence is out there, in say, example, the book that you've just written, great book, gives people the understanding that it is possible for them. And sometimes people in our community stand on the stage when they heal themselves and they said, God, I knew this stuff. I believe this stuff was the truth. I just didn't believe it would work for me.
Yeah.
I believe it worked for everybody else. I never let in that it could actually work for me. Now, this is the moment where the rubber hits the road. I mean, this is the moment where now it's about me, right? This is no longer philosophical. This is where people begin to really go all in. And you got to believe in yourself in order to believe in possibility. And that's the cool part about it.
Yeah, and that's what I love about what you do, because you help people to believe that, yeah, I can do it as well. And you help ordinary people to believe that they really can be extraordinary. One of the things that I did in the book, I had a wee play, and I thought, there's lots of scientific evidence. So I came up with an equation. I call it the consciousness equation. And it basically says exactly what you just said a moment ago, that it doesn't even matter whether you've got a football field number of people. It's the feeling, it's the sense of felt connection that matters. And the more you feel connected, whether it's to the person that you're working with, or even whether it's to, what you call God, people call God, the universe, that once we close the gap between ourselves and someone else emotionally, or between ourselves and the universe, the quantum field emotionally, then the strength of the effect increases exponentially. And that's what I call it the consciousness equation. For those of you watching now, I'm not asking, and I'm just having a play in the book. I don't ask people to do long division or add X's and Y's. It's simply just a wee a wee line written in the language of math that says, I was really just trying to say, in addition to evidence and science, if you can show something is mathematically true as well, I think people start to listen as well. So for the skeptics, I threw in that little bit of math, just to show that there is also a sound basis in that language for what you've just explained about, interconnectedness.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Great idea.
Yeah, I just thought I'd have a little kind of play, but it basically predicts. I think these kind of things are predictive. It basically predicts that the more you feel connected to another person, or whether you're a healer, even whether you're right beside them, or even if they're on the other side of the world, that distance doesn't really matter. That what really matters is how connected you feel to the person, or how much empathy or compassion or love in that present moment that you can feel for a person. It massively increases the actual power, if you like, of the wave that you're sending to that kind of person. It's very consistent with the work that you've been doing.
Yes. It
Yeah.
is.
So, what was I going to say? I have you got any plans to do, like, I've talked about distant healing. You've been doing a lot of work in your stuff by hooking people up in the present moment. Have you got plans to see if you can get people in another place and you can send healing intention to them?
Yeah, so funny you say that because before the global pandemic in February of that year, 2020, we had such incredible momentum because we were doing these coherence healings on people, and as I said, I think I was more surprised than anybody else in witnessing what was happening right before my eyes, and then when the pandemic happened, we had to build a bigger model. And so if you're able to heal yourself, the next question is, can I heal somebody else? Now, if you're able to heal yourself and heal somebody else, the next question is, can I do it at a distance? Do I really physically need to be there? So what bit of knowledge, what bit of philosophy, what bit of science can I build to understand that I could actually do that? Do I really need to be in the presence of that person? So the model has to go to, okay, if I truly can become pure consciousness and connect to that invisible field of energy, that quantum field, then there's no separation. So I don't need to be in the presence of that person. I just need a coordinate. I need a picture. I need a thought. And it's got to be connected to that elevated emotion called love, because love is what connects us. And so that energetic energy of love then combined with creating from the field should be able to produce some type of remote effects. So when we did our analysis over the course of the year, and we had people come together, and this isn't just like, oh, I did a healing today and I'll do one next week. These people had nothing else to do. They were doing 3 and 4 healings a day, every day, never missed a day on other people. And so when we started getting some of these stories of, mothers with children that had birth conditions and people with severe brain injuries and all kinds of different neurological disorders and autoimmune conditions, you see them going into complete remission. A very reputable university in the United States, one of the top universities in the United States, contacted us and said, can we study this? Because we want to change the conversation of medicine if this is the truth. So 34% of the people that are in this remote coherence healing have a statistical change that is in the range of 7, 8, 9 out of 10 improvement. So that's 30%, a third of the people, right? So that's a significant value. So now what we want to do is to be able to tease out the common factors to really see what it is that's in common. So we've done gene analysis on the people, before they've had their remote healing. We've done the gene analysis on the people that are doing the healing. Why? Because many times when people are administering a healing and they're feeling that incredible amount of love, their body's getting healed as well too. So we see people say, hey, I had macular degeneration. I don't know what the hell happened. I was healing somebody else, and man, I healed somebody else. I healed myself. Now here's the payoff though. During COVID, when I started dropping in on these groups and they would come together, and at the end of the week, they'd always have their celebration of people that were healed. And they would invite 5 people on, say 4 or 5 people on, and they would tell their story. Now, I just would drop in because I was curious. Now, there's 70 healers, 60 healers, they're all on a Zoom call, and here's a mother telling her story about a child that was born listless, unresponsive, couldn't connect with her siblings, was, very limited mobility. After the first healing, smiling, looking at her brothers, trying to talk. This is a mother telling the story.
Amazing.
And I'm looking at the entire group of healees, right? And we're all in tears of joy. Like there's an empathy that happens in the species of us, these mammalian creatures called human beings that are part human, part mammalian, part divine. When you see another heal and you are a part of it, that the emotion that they felt, that we were feeling, was this level of love that was transcendent of the love that they used to heal the person. Now, why is that significant? Because they created a new experience. The experience of witnessing somebody heal has a new emotion. And it's not like a sports car. It's not like a wardrobe. It's not like a beer. It's something else. And when they go in to do their next healing, they can tap that feeling and produce a greater outcome because they're moving closer and closer to pure love, closer and closer to source. So they're able to hit the target more and more. And so we're trying to demystify that process and teach people how to do it so consistently that when we get to be 1 out of 2, when we're 50%, we'll walk into a hospital and say, or contact the hospital and say, here's our data. Here's the science behind it. Here's the epigenetic changes. We want to go to a children's hospital. We don't want anything. We're not doing it for money. We're not doing it for notoriety or net recognition. We're doing it for that feeling. And when we're 1 out of 2, we're going to walk in or contact. We already have children's hospitals that are asking. We're going to go into a children's hospital and help those kids, with cancers and diseases that they were born with, and to see if we can move the needle. And we've already started working with some of those children now.
That's truly beautiful, and I love that what's motivating you here and the work of all these healers is to actually make a real difference. And what you're also doing is you're uncovering the how. It's not just like, I think one of the things I noticed in the science when I was researching for this book is some of the scientists who were skeptical of this kind of phenomena, who didn't fully understand why it worked, would build the study protocol and miss out the vital ingredients. So, for example, if the people were invited to pray or imagine healing for the other person, they didn't really get to know who the other person was. They were given, the first name and the initial of the surname, and sometimes they were given a study ID number, like 7 or 8 digits. There's no empathy and connection. And some of those studies didn't work. And they said, prayer, distant healing doesn't work. But yet the other studies were the scientists like yourself who understood a little bit of the mechanism. What actually is that ingredient? They were actually given the name of the person, sometimes a photograph, a little bit about the person's life, but also regular updates about the person's condition. And what happens then is you start to build an emotional investment. I really want that person to recover. Those studies were really successful.
Always connection, emotional connection is so important. And for me, God, every now and then when we were doing our events and we're doing remote healings and we're healing 180 people or 175 people at a remote location all over the world. And every now and then by the end of the event, we'll get somebody who'll send an email to our staff and say, I know this is incredible. I had this really rare genetic disorder I was treating for the last 15 years. I am completely, I don't have any pain in my body. And they go through the whole story. And what I want to do, because when the people do the healing, they sign their name on an envelope. And when they put the picture of the person in the envelope, I want to say to them, hey, group number 65, stand up, right? And they're all different races, and they're all different sizes, and they're all different weights, and they're all different social status, and they're all different diets, and everything else that creates separation. I say, you healed that person That person no longer has that. I want them to know.
Yeah.
I want them to know that
Mm.
they did it, because that will change the game about their belief. I want everybody to see them, because it'll change their belief about what's possible. So again, it's just that 4-minute mile, crossing that line, and then anybody can do it. Nobody is so special to be excluded from the act. And I think that the more you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, the how gets easier. And I think science now is the contemporary language to
Yeah.
demystify that mystical, and building those scientific models in an easy way, and not talking tradition or culture or religion or spirituality. That divides a community always. But if you use science as that language, it creates community, it creates communion, it creates connection. That's the language that we use, so that we're not talking in a language of 5,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or even 50 years ago. We're talking the language that people that is universal in some way.
And we're adding to that language. What I love now is science is now using the word love and compassion and empathy. I mean, when I do online research in science databases, and you type love or empathy or kindness or compassion, there's thousands and thousands of hits. But 5 years ago, it was half a dozen, and we're bringing that in. And some of the stuff I noticed is, well, you were talking about, it doesn't matter what nationality, what race, what color of skin, because some of the research has people from different backgrounds and different styles of healing. So one person's sending Reiki to a person in an MRI scanner, one person's sending Qigong, one person's a Hawaiian kahuna, and another person's doing shamanic healing. And it didn't actually matter what style they used. The common factor was love. It was empathy, and not just a desire for the person to be well, but an actual sense of, I really care about you, and I really, really want you. I really, and that closes that intellectual gap between it's another person over there and I'm here. It closes that gap and makes you, for a moment, just feel that we're actually two sides of the same heart, or the same coin. Two sides, we're the same thing, same energy. And I'm just in this moment, I love you, and I wish for you to be a little bit better right now. And that's the formula that you're demonstrating, which is amazing.
And the antithesis is also true too, because the more coherent the brain and heart is, the stronger the signal. Well, if you have somebody that you really, really love in your life, and you're seeing them suffer and you're suffering with them, well, your probability of being able to heal them diminishes, because you got to get into that elevated state. And God, when we see people at the a week-long event, sometimes they'll say, I had a hard time opening my heart the whole week. And then, they have a 9-year-old child with a brain tumor, and that's their person that they have to heal. Well, game over.
Yeah.
Because here it's never about us. It's not about accumulating things, it's never about that. It's about what we can give, right? And so you know this, you wrote that great book on kindness. You got to, when you give from the heart, and that releases oxytocin, and oxytocin signals nitric oxide, and here come the whole host of vasodilators that open your heart. There's more energy going into your heart. Your heart is full, and that influences the brain. It opens the field up. Now you're connected. Now you're transcending space and time. So I say the better you get at that. And we have people that their amplitudes and heart coherence are 3 times as high as normal. That's not a little love. That's so much love that when you interview the person, they say, let me tell you something. And these are men too, by the way. It was so big that I needed a moment. It was too big for me to let it in all at once. It was too much. I had to really relax into and see how much I could take. Imagine that being a problem in your life. Wow, that's a person's experiencing so much love, they can't handle it. Now that's when the gate opens, right? And then what do you want to do is you want to give more, because you want people to feel the way you feel. And the only way you can have them feel the way you feel is to give them something. And when you give them something, then you feel like you're receiving. And that changes the course of humanity that's so divided and separated, so polarized.
Absolutely. And I'm very conscious of your time, Joe. It's almost like I don't what your PST, aren't you? So it's what, 9 o'clock?
It's almost 11 o'clock.
Almost 11 o'clock. I forget where you are. You're always in a different place in the world.
I happen to be in my home, actually.
All right, I'm at 7 o'clock. I'm in central Scotland, wee town called Dunblane at the moment. So, but I'm very quiet. I know that you have to finish at 11 o'clock. I just wanted to say, thank you so much for sharing your time. I know that everyone listening to this has just been absolutely blown away. It's been a real pleasure, not just further deeper in our friendship, but just listening to you talking so passionately about love and compassion and healing and this absolutely incredible desire to make people better, make people happier, and recognize that every ordinary person can be this higher version of themselves, and we just need to love more and give more, and that's the magic ingredient. So I just thank you so much for sharing your time.
No, I'm so honored. Thank you for writing such a great book. I think people need to hear this information. I think it's so much easier to forget it than remember it, and it takes constant reminders. And your book is a great reminder that dispels a lot of the myths out of what's possible for human beings. So thank you for such a great contribution, and always make time for you, because I love you and I care about you.
I love you too, Joe. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So, and for everyone listening, I'm happy. I know Joe's got to go, but I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. And I'm sure everyone, I know we can't see you, but I'm sure you're very grateful for Joe's presence here today. And I know you're probably all giving him a little clap. So thank you so much, Joe.
Okay, thank you, David. Be well, okay?
And same to you.
Okay, ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Yeah, well, I'm quite happy to stay. For anyone who's still here, I'm quite happy to answer a couple of questions. And I know that Hey House can switch on the chat function. And so I've got about 15 minutes. And so if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to see what I can do. Let me just check the chat. Oh, well, lots of thank yous. So someone said, did I mention crystals? We didn't get onto that. I'll click back on the chat in a moment. So someone asked me that. The questions are going up so fast because there's so many of us in this call, but I'm picking up a couple of questions as they're going through. So one of them said, did I mention crystals? Yeah, in the book, I show 3 ways that crystals do actually have an impact on us. One of the ways that crystals, in fact, I've got one here. I use them for this purpose. Crystals are one way that they affect us is the clarity of a crystal. Like this crystal, for example, is really clear. It's crystal clear, if you will. It's a citrine crystal. But the clarity of a crystal can serve as what's called a mental representation. And what it means is the clarity of the crystal represents mentally the state of clarity that one wishes to attain. And so by having a crystal visible or even holding it while you practice meditation can actually enhance the meditation practice, simply because the crystal itself serves as a mental representation. But another way that crystals work is actually also through color psychology. I mean, here's a really good thing. The colors of crystals actually can bring about neurological effects. Here's a good example. So scientists did this study where they gave a cherry flavored drink to a number of people, but they colored it green, right? So it was a cherry flavored drink, like cherry Coke kind of thing, but they colored it green. Do you know, just over a third of the people in that study couldn't taste cherry, and they could swear that it was lemon or lime flavored. In other words, the brain processed taste based on what something should taste like given its color, rather than what it actually was itself. Another similar study gave pineapple sherbet, but colored it pink. And about almost a half of people couldn't taste pineapple and thought it was a bubblegum flavor because it was pink. In other words, here again, the brain processes taste based on what something should be given its color rather than what it actually is for a number of people. So one aspect of how crystals can affect us is by the color themselves. And that's why crystals that are pink colored that represent, love or femininity can actually be very beneficial in that kind of way. Yellow crystals, which yellow as a color represents cheeriness, it can actually make people feel happier. Blue crystals, because they're blue is a calming color, and in that kind of sense can actually make us feel more calm. So there's actually 3 ways that crystals have an impact on us. But I'm just scanning through this these questions. There's absolutely I think thousands of them coming up, but I'll see if I can pick up anything quickly. So a few people asking about visualization. So the main strategy, I like what Joe said. I don't often use the word visualization either. I often refer to it as imagine, because I think sometimes we say visualize, it puts some people off, but if you can imagine, then we all imagine in our own way. The main strategy for using visualization or imagination to impact our own health and wellness is to take a state of illness and in our minds convert it into a state of wellness, and just do that over and over and over again. So take a representation, just your own mental idea of illness, and turn it into your own mental idea of wellness, and just do that repetitively, like over and over and over again. And the more repetition you do, like let's say you do 5 minutes a day of repetition, then what that actually does is begin to wire our brain circuits. So visualization works in that sense that it literally wires our actual brain circuits. Someone asking me also, what's the book called? Yeah, well, the book is called Why Woo-Woo Works. Woo-woo is actually defined as unconventional beliefs regarded as having little or no scientific evidence, especially those related to spirituality, mysticism, or alternative medicine. And so what the actual word woo-woo itself actually was coined in the 1980s, supposedly in relation to the wailing sounds that ghosts had made in movies and stuff like that. So what I've actually done in all this research in the book, I've been working on this since December 2019, is take a range of subjects that people tend to be skeptical about, like how belief shifts biology, how visualization works and can heal, how meditation works, and different styles of meditation impact the brain in different ways, even how nature can heal. Here, get this. Do you know hospital patients recover faster if their window offers them a view of natural surroundings, like trees, grass, sounds of birds chirping, versus a window that gives them a view of a car park or another hospital building? And so nature itself has an impact on us. And so I talk about that because that's often called woo-woo, that nature can have a healing effect. I talk about biofield therapies. A biofield is just an electrical or magnetic field that's produced by a biological process. And people call biofield therapies woo-woo. They say, oh, that's all pseudoscience, because they don't really know what the word biofield means. But if I was to plug something into a wall socket, then that's a physical field. That's an electric field generated by my wall socket. But a biofield is simply an electric or magnetic field that's generated by a biological organism. In other words, by the flow of sodium and potassium and calcium in through your cells generates an electric field, which is called a bioelectric field, by virtue of the fact that it was generated by a biological process. Now, the way that the heart pumps blood through the body means that electrical field is being moved. There's a movement in that direction. Now, what that actually does physically is that generates a magnetic field. And so as the electric field is moving around the body by virtue of the direction of flow of blood, that a magnetic field generates at right angles to it, so it comes out the way. And that's why devices called magnetometers can measure the magnetic field of the heart, because blood is circulating that way. Whenever you have an electric field going like that, you have a magnetic field that will always come out of it. So that's why magnetic fields are shown on the internet as coming out of the heart. And that isn't woo either. It's a real physical effect caused by the movement of ions in and out of cells. So let me just see. Someone mentioned, do I mention tapping in the book? Yes, I do. I mention a wee bit about tapping and some of the MRI research that has been done on that. Oh, also in the book, I talk about consciousness. Is it inside your head? Or is consciousness something fundamental to nature itself? And it just feels like it's inside your head. And I suggest that it is something that's part of nature itself, and it just feels like it's inside your head because we identify so much with our physical bodies that it feels like it's inside your head, but it's really something out there. And through that, that is what allows us to impact people at a distance when we say prayers for them, for example. What someone's asking, what's the biggest way that visualization has enhanced or changed something for me in my life? Actually, the application of visualization for mental health. You know, in my life, I have struggled at times with anxiety. You know, I struggled with depression several years ago. For those of you who don't know much about me, I used to work as an R&D scientist in the pharmaceutical industry. I used to build drugs for cardiovascular disease and cancer. And I became fascinated by the placebo effect, which I've also mentioned in the book, and how mind impacts the body. And because anxiety is something that has come in my life through adulthood several times, one of the biggest light bulb moments, I would say, for me was recognizing we can use visualization processes even to help us when we are struggling with what we might call aspects of mental illness. I mean, you know, here's a good example. A gentleman several years ago shared this with me, and this was one of the things that really changed some of the direction that I applied things to. He had treatment-resistant depression, so his, you know, he struggled so badly, the drugs were no longer working. He'd actually made a suicide attempt, and someone had suggested to him that he try visualization. And he read one of my books, How Your Mind Can Heal Your Body. And he thought, well, I talked about physical things. And he said, well, I wonder if I can apply this to my depression. And so I often say to people, you have to find a mental representation. So some way of describing mentally how you feel. So he said he felt broken. So he created a mental image of his brokenness as a mirror that had fallen on the floor and shattered. So in his mind's eye, he thought, I have to turn that brokenness into wholeness. So in his imagination, he swept up the shards of broken mirror and imagined putting them in a cauldron. And then he imagined lighting a fire under the cauldron until the shards of mirror melted and it became liquid silver. And then he poured them into a new mold. And he gently blew on it and cooled it down and set the new glass. And he'd made the mirror whole again. So he'd taken brokenness and turned it into wholeness. In other words, a broken mirror turned it into a whole mirror. So the broken mirror was a representation mentally of how he felt. But now the whole mirror that's all back together again was a representation of his wholeness. And he did that every single day, sometimes just for a minute or two a day. And within a couple of months, he was completely recovered from depression. So thanks for that question. That was one of the biggest ways that visualization impacted me, not for me, something I did myself, but recognizing that we can apply it to even helping ourselves or others when they're even struggling with mental health. So let me see, I'm just checking through these. Yes, I do touch on the law of attraction in my book as well. Yeah, but in fact, the last chapter is talking about, well, if everything is connected and we all impact each other all the time, then if I visualize my future that I would like to have, then I must be impacting everyone else. And so in some kind of way that can organize into seemingly synchronistic events. So I explain the science of how that actually works in the book. So thanks for that. Color therapies. Yep, I talk about color in the book. Do you know that? I'm sorry, there's so many questions. What I'm trying to do is group some of them together that are similar so that I can give you as much information as possible in this time. Oh, thanks, Jackie. I just saw your comment, Jackie Mexon. Thank you. There's actually lots of thank yous. Oh, thank you, Vanita. meditate with my crystal. So do I, Mary. I meditate with my crystal. And, and what I love about that is, here's a good thing I talk about in the book, actually. Do you know crystals, quartz crystal, this is a basis of quartz. They have a property called diamagnetism. What diamagnetism is, if it's pouring with rain and the rain's coming down in a straight line and I put an umbrella up, then the umbrella will divert the flow of the rain away from me, right? So the rain will actually move away and it will dump it onto someone else. Something that's diamagnetic does something very similar. Quartz is diamagnetic, does something very similar, but it's not the rain, it's the Earth's magnetic field. So as the Earth's magnetic field's coming down, a diamagnetic substance diverts it onto things beside it. And there's a lot of research that shows when you ever so slightly increase or decrease the Earth's magnetic field in the vicinity of a plant, that it can actually affect the rate that plants grow. And the reason scientists are studying this is because they're actively considering, could we send plants into space? Could we grow plants on the moon or in Mars if we were able to cultivate some soil? And what would that mean? Because the magnetic field on Mars is very different from the magnetic field on Earth. Would the plants still grow? So it's called plant magnetoreception. There's a lot of research going into it right now for that basis, because we are considering sending plants into space. And so, but what that research shows is if you tweak the Earth's magnetic field, it does affect the rate that plants grow. Now, one of the things that tweaks the magnetic field of the Earth's magnetic field is quartz, because it's diamagnetic. And so what it does, it forces the magnetic field around itself, which means it intensifies the magnetic field in anything in the vicinity. Oh, on another note, get this, so I get really excited talking about this kind of stuff. Get this, but quartz is actually a protector of the Earth. See, when an earthquake happens when two plates, that underground formations of Earth crust, when they rub against each other, it goes. That's why an earthquake is it's when two plates go like that and they rub, they rub against this, and then one thing slips and you get a slip, and that creates a really big earthquake on the Richter scale. You know how the Earth heals itself? That cut is healed is molten quartz, which is part of the lava, part of the magma. Molten quartz begins to crystallize into quartz crystals across the cut. And as they crystallize, it binds the two sides of the earthquake together. That's actually true. That's published in one of the top scientific journals in the world just last year. So it's the crystallization of quartz crystal from molten magma that actually heals the cut in the earth as the earth tears during an earthquake. So I talk about these kind of things in the book as well, all in the context of why woo-woo actually works. So let me just check if I've got any questions. I've probably got a few minutes left. I've got another event on that I have to get. I wouldn't want to hold people up, but I'm so enjoying having this conversation. Let me think. I use Reiki and EFT. I've shared a lot of research on Reiki. I've used Reiki as a representative example of biofield therapies because it's one of the ones that's most scientifically criticized by skeptics. It's a hands-on healing therapy like therapeutic touch, Jorei, Biora, these kind of things. It's one of the most criticized, but it's also one that has the most scientific research behind it. And I've cited randomized controlled trials where Reiki was shown to reduce pain over a range of conditions, including people that have had cancer, people who have cancer and undergoing treatment, including people who've just had recovering from an operation. And randomized controlled clinical trials showing that Reiki reduces pain, also relieves anxiety and reduces symptoms of depression. That's randomized controlled clinical trials. And in these trials, Reiki is compared to what they call mimic Reiki. Mimic Reiki is when you have an actor pretending that they're carrying out the same movements, but the Reiki practitioner is doing Reiki, and the Reiki practitioner scores much higher in how they measure recoveries and stuff than the person doing mimic Reiki. And part of that is what Joe and I were talking about, the natural healer effect. Because when you're trained to heal people, you're not doing it just because you can make some money out of it, are you? You're doing it because you care. I know lots of people who do Reiki and other healing therapies, and they do it because of, damn it, they're good people. And I know some of you, a lot of you listening here, you're the same. You're good people, and you wish to heal people. As you do that, that impacts the magnetic field from your own heart, and it impacts your heart rhythms, which will then impact the brain waves in the heart rhythms and the magnetic field in the heart of the person that you're working on. So the more empathy you feel and the more love, and this is true not just for a healer, this is true for an MD, a GP, a doctor in a surgery who's feeling empathy for their patients. Because in the book as well, I talk about, I suggest a happy fusion between East and West. So we take the best of the West, but fuse it with the best of all the rest and add all of them together. But what matters in all modalities is the fact that we be empathetic and kind. Sorry, I'm just checking. This might be a note from my next host. So I'm going to have to go because I've got another event starting very shortly, and I think they're just checking that I'm about to go online. So on that note, thank you everyone so much for attending tonight. It's been an absolute joy, and I'll thank you for all your, I'm watching the comments coming up. It's been my absolute pleasure. And, thanks for joining me in celebrating. This is my 11th book. It's called Why Woo Woo Works. Oh, by the way, you can pre-order. It's available to pre-order now. My publisher wants to encourage people to pre-order on the basis that if you're going to read it anyway, then you might as well pre-order it. And what that does, that helps me, because it means that if Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all these online places see pre-orders, it encourages bookshops to stock it, and it's my way of helping to get the book out. Actually, the more people who pre-order it rather than wait until it comes out, the more likely it is to be on shops, and the more likely other people, even skeptical people, are likely to hear about this kind of stuff. So you go on my website, you can see there's a pre-order page. If you pre-order, you also get access to this recording as well, the whole thing. So drdavidhamilton.com/woo-woo. Simple as that. drdavidhamilton.com/woo-woo, as in WOO. So drdavidhamilton.com/woo-woo. And there's a little video of the book, me talking about the book in there. And you can also pre-order, and that gives you access to the actual recording. And, I'm not doing this because I'm a shocking salesperson. I've never been a salesperson. I'm really genuinely saying, if you are going to read the book at some point, then you may as well just pre-order it. And that, as I say, that does help me, because it means that that book stockists are more likely to stock a book if it's been pre-ordered, because it shows people actually like the subject. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I better go for this other event. But I don't want to stop. I'm enjoying hanging out with you so much. Lots of love to you all anyway, and thanks for all you. I'm watching all these thank yous coming up, so thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining us tonight, and I want to say thank you to Hay House and to Julie in particular for hosting all this. And I know that she's still in the office, and this is nighttime in the UK, so thank you so much, Julie, for that as well. So thanks everyone. I'll have to take off, and here's Julie back again. Shall I just go then, Julie?
Oh, thank you so much, David. Yes, this has been such an amazing and enlightening talk with you and Dr. Joe Dispenza. So we thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us as well.
Hi everyone. I'll have to go then for my next event. Lots of love. Oh, hi Ben. Thanks for that.
Thank you, David.
Bye,
take care. So if you would like to find out more about why woo-woo subjects have the power to heal and why they have a strong basis in science, David's new book, Why Woo-woo Works, is available to pre-order now, as you said, on drdavidhamilton.com/woo-woo. We will put a slide up for a moment so you can take a photo of the link if you like, but take care. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.